Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Westside Wildfire Research Initiative, co-producing science to meet management needs in Western Washington and Oregon presentation. Please, I'm going to ask folks to go ahead and take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat box with your name, organization, and location, if you don't mind. This is part of the 2021 Pacific Northwest Collaborative Virtual Workshop. This is the second year we are holding this event virtually. It's following a similar schedule as last year. We're trying to hold about 2 webinars per month through October. Thanks for all those who joined us at the last presentation on old growth on the East Side workshop. That recording is now available on our website, and you should have received a link to that as well as a survey. We really appreciate if you could take just a couple minutes and fill out that survey. That helps us better understand your all needs in terms of presentations and workshops and things you'd like to learn. I just really want to briefly thank all of our sponsors for this workshop series, and give special thanks to our silver sponsor levels, including Hampton Lumber, Timberline Lodge, U.S. Forest Service, and Northwest Fire Consortium. I have a few ground rules today. I did start recording the session. That way we can make it available for folks, and we'll send out a link and it'll be posted on our website. I'm going to ask folks to go ahead and please stay muted unless otherwise instructed. If you would like to ask a question or please use the chat box, we will collect those questions and get those to the appropriate, the presenters. The chat box will be restricted only to the co-hosts and myself. We will have a little bit of time at the end of the meeting for a breakout room, just sort of an informal sort of networking get together at the end, just to sort of chat and network. And we may have multiple breakout rooms, or if there's just a few folks, we might just do one. We'll just play it by ear on that. Please keep your videos off. It helps sort of with bandwidth. We may ask at times to turn your video on, should you feel comfortable. We recognize how nice it is to see everyone's faces. Again, we're still, even though we've been doing this for a while, we're still, it's still a learning process for us. So we hope, everybody can learn and follow the rules so that we all get the most out of this. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Andy McAvoy with the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station. He's going to be sort of running and facilitating this conversation this afternoon, excuse me. Go ahead.
Great, thanks, Pete. Give me 1 second. I'll share my screen here. Okay. Well, thanks, Pete, and thank you, Sustainable Northwest, for hosting this. This is a great opportunity for us to share our work, and we're looking forward to that opportunity today. And it looks so far like a fantastic audience. So thank you all for making the time to come today, and we're excited about this opportunity. My name is Andy McAvoy. I'm a research fellow at the Pacific Northwest Research Station. And myself and my colleagues, who you'll meet throughout this webinar today, are here as part of the Westside Fire and Climate Adaptation Initiative. This is an ongoing collection of research projects hosted by the PNW Research Station. And we're here to sort of share, it's a bit of a progress report. These are projects that are, in progress right now, or various stages of completion. And so we're here to sort of share where we are. So a little bit about what we're going to do today. We have a fairly ambitious schedule. We've got a lot that we want to fit into about an hour and a half or so. I'm going to start by just giving you all a brief introduction to what the Westside Fire Research Initiative is, what it's all about, and what we aim to do. And then we're going to do a lightning round of research summaries. So there will be 3 research teams that will each present a 5-minute summary. And then following following all three of those presentations, you, the audience, will have a chance to attend two breakout sessions, breakout A and B. Each one of those will be 15 minutes. So you can follow up in depth with the researchers and ask some questions and hopefully open some more informal dialogue about the work that they're conducting. And then we're going to repeat that same process with another 3 research topics after that and go through 2 more breakout sessions. And then there'll just be sort of a few closing remarks. And like Pete indicated, if folks are up for it, try and sort of create a little bit of that informal workshop conference feel. We'll leave the meeting open and we could possibly even open some breakout rooms so that folks can continue conversations that they started in the breakout rooms. So that's kind of what we're going to aim to do today. And I'm just going to start here. I'm going to give you, just like I said, a brief introduction to the initiative. So these research initiatives are a new way that the research station, the Pacific Northwest Research Station, is planning to conduct its business in the foreseeable future. It's part of our new research framework. And it came out of conversations dating as far back as 2016-17, reflecting on our work as scientists and the way that we're not engaging with our partners and the way our work was or was not being implemented or being used in the field. And so we're piloting these projects that we're calling initiatives, and initiatives are topic focused. So they have a theme to them, in this case, Westside Fire. They're discrete, so they're intended to last about 1 to 5 years, depending on the topic and the needs of our partners. And the overall goal is to increase our collaboration and improve our communication with partners and stakeholders, as well as to sort of align our research with agency priorities and and help sort of, but really the overarching goal is to improve in our communication and collaboration with partners. And the way we're going about doing that is by adopting what we call a co-production model of research, where partners and stakeholders from various disciplines and backgrounds, community planners, communication specialists, natural resource professionals, anyone who has a vested interest in whatever the initiative topic area is, by designing these projects so that those partners and stakeholders are included throughout the entire research cycle, right? From conceptualization to study design and implementation, to review of results, to evaluation and adjustment, and then ultimately to delivering and communicating the results to the wider public. So, and that's what we've been doing as part of the Westside work, is engaging these partners since the very beginning. This initiative is a pilot project. It's one of the first initiatives that the station has hosted. So we're definitely, a work in progress and sort of trying this on and figuring out how we can adjust in the future. But this initiative started in 2019 officially. And I think that's important to remember in the context of this meeting. A lot of these projects were conceived of and launched before the 2020 wildfires. So Westside Wildfire is already on people's minds, but obviously those fires have sort of changed the landscape physically and sort of metaphorically there. But we launched this in 2019 during a partner engagement workshop. And we decided on Westside Fire at the time, just because of sort of informal conversations with partners and stakeholders of various kinds, natural resource professionals, who all identified a lack of sort of cohesive scientific body of knowledge around Westside Wildfire. There's been tons of research, as we all know, in sort of dry forest settings and more fire-prone regions of the Pacific Northwest, but not nearly as much research is focused specifically on Westside Fire. And so this initiative was formed to fill those critical knowledge gaps. So we convened this workshop in 2019, included lots of different perspectives on wildfire and wildfire risk and communication. And out of that came 3 priority research areas. Those are the 3 bullet points you see there: past, current, and future role of fire in Westside forests, fire and carbon-oriented management, and post-fire vegetation and fuel trajectories. So that's what came out of the 2019 workshop, were these 3 priority areas. And since then, research teams have been sort of working in smaller groups with researchers and partners, and have collectively come up with about 10 to 15 research projects, depending on how we slice and dice what we call a project. It's somewhere between 10 and 15 research projects that are all in various stages of progress right now, like I mentioned. And collectively, the projects all address these 3 priority research areas. And what we have here today is a subset of our research teams. We don't have all 10 to 15 projects represented. We have 6 research teams here today that are going to touch on each of these 3 priority areas. And they're here to share the motivation for their work, how they designed their studies, and where they are today with that. And they're in various stages of progress. So with that, a little bit of background on what the initiative is and what we're all about. We're going to start our lightning summaries now. So again, you'll hear from, right first here, you're going to hear from 3 different research teams. Each one will give a 5-minute summary. And then we're going to set up breakout rooms, and you'll have an opportunity to follow up with the research teams you were most interested in, the 2 you were most interested in breakout rooms. So please be a little patient. We're managing a lot of people and a lot of breakout rooms, but nonetheless, I'm sure we'll get it done. So we just thank you in advance for your patience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Riley as our first researcher here.
Hey folks, thanks for joining us today. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of our project here on re-examining historical fire regimes. And first of all, thanks for taking the time to join us today. I think after last fall, Westside Fire has really been on everyone's mind in the region. And certainly those fires last fall were a devastating reminder that these large high severity fires are a reality on the west side and the Pacific Northwest. While fires have increased in drier parts of the region, Westside fire activity has been relatively limited until recently. And given the recent uptick, I think there's a real need to revisit, what we know about fire on the west side and what we don't know about the historical fire regime on the west side. And, in recent years, there's really been growing recognition that historical fire regimes on the west side are far more complex than previously thought. And there's a couple critical uncertainties that remain that are sort of a major focus of our work. And these have to do with the historical linkages between fire, climate, and human populations. And so the project takes a regional look at historical fire activity on the west side. And what we do is we integrate spatial data on early 20th century fires, which is what you see on the left side of this slide. And then we integrate that with annually precise fire histories from fire scarred trees that are going to be collected out in the field. And so putting those together, the specific objectives of our work really revolve around quantifying variability in the pre-settlement fire regime in terms of fire frequency, fire severity, and how they influenced forest dynamics and stand development over time. And then the second part is really characterizing linkages between climate variability, human populations, and fire at broad temporal and spatial scales. And we're using what we refer to as a multi-proxy approach. So we have multiple sources of data that we're going to rely on. And in terms of the 2 major components of the project, the first is really looking at early 20th century fires. This is a period of Westside history where we know there was a lot of fire. And what we're doing is trying to collect all sources of data we can: aerial photographs, historical inventories, current forest inventory that might show stands dating back to the early 1900s, and putting that together to come up with as complete a picture as possible of that early 20th century fire episode that we saw on the west side. The second major component is a really large collaboration with James Johnston at the Oregon State University Tree Ring Lab, and we're fortunate that they have the equipment and the facilities to tackle this. Andrew Marshall was just brought on as a postdoc, and he'll be doing a lot of that tree ring fire scar work as well. And what that part of the project is looked at is focused on the Western Cascades. And so we have a series of randomly placed plots within the range of Douglas fir across the 4 major national forests in the Western Cascades. So the Willamette, the Mount Hood, the Gifford Pinchot, and the Mount Baker Snoqualmie. And if you look at that picture on the right, what's happening in the field is crews are going out and cutting slabs from stumps. And what they're doing is bringing them back to the OSU field lab and sanding them down and cross-dating them, and then giving us annually precise reconstructions of when fires occurred. And then I have an example on this slide as well. This is some of the results from some of James Johnston's work down in the Rigdon study area, which is the southern part of the Willamette, where we've taken that information and basically put it together to come up with predicted fire return intervals. And so it gives us a broader picture of how fire acted across environmental gradients in this watershed. And I think that's about all the time I have for now. If you join the breakout room, I have some other slides that go into a little bit more depth about some of the parts of the project and some of the preliminary findings. So I hope to be able to share those with you in a bit. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Matt. So next, we have Josh Halofsky.
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Halofsky. I'm a landscape ecologist with the Washington State Department of Natural Resources here in Olympia. Like Matt, I first want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here and showing a keen interest in a topic that, in my very unbiased perspective, is incredibly important and also fascinating and interesting as well. I also want to recognize that while I'm the face of this project today, for better or worse, there's actually a whole host of collaborators in the research community and management community without whom none of this work would be happening, and all of whom I feel really fortunate to work with. So with all that said, I guess my interest in Westside Fire goes back about a decade when I first started to look at the interactions between forest development, wildfire, and climate change on the Olympic Peninsula. And through that work, I was surprised that I noticed some gaps in the research from both an ecological and management perspective. And one of those gaps was really just the thin amount of literature describing how forests respond to fire across much of our two states here on the west side, right? And that kind of makes sense since we're in a part of the world where the fire return interval or rotation could span centuries. And so what motivated me to do this work was to try to start to fill in this gap in our knowledge ecologically. And just stepping back and thinking more broadly, it feels like we can't. How are we going to know how to respond to future fire events if we don't understand the fundamental processes that shape these forests today? And so while that's a lot of the motivation for the work, I probably didn't really get my hands dirty in all this until the Norse Peak fire in 2017, that at the time, at 25,000 acres or so, was considered one of the largest Western Washington wildfires in more than a half a century. And that fire was really important to me in a lot of dimensions, but one of those important reasons was that it started a discussion that led to really more of a collaboration between myself and some colleagues and the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest and the Tulalip tribe. And results of those discussions and interactions are reflected in some of these research area bullets you see in front of you. Our research areas also expanded after interactions with the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest and one of the forest collaboratives they interact with, who expressed a lot of interest in complex early seral habitat, which is that most rare and ephemeral condition of forest development on the landscape today. And then lastly, our research areas kind of expanded and existing areas were reinforced following the convening of the Westside Fire Initiative that Andy mentioned back in late 2019 and early 2020. And so while all these areas appear to resonate with us and those we interact with, on a more day-to-day or month-to-month basis, I hope all of these ideas also resonate with all of you, and I'd love to get feedback for areas you think you don't feel are important, or areas where you think where we just entirely missed the boat. And during our session today, you will all be severely disappointed if you come to this session expecting answers to a lot of the questions in these research areas, right? Right now we're in the thick of data collection and only in our infancy in data analysis. But what you can expect if you choose to come to my session is really, hopefully, more of a discussion where I'll purposely show or introduce topics, but it'll be unsatisfying because my introductions will be incomplete. And I do that again on purpose because I want to give all of us enough space to allow you to drive the discussion to the areas that are of interest to all of you, because ultimately my objective is to hopefully all of us learn from each other. So thank you all very much, and I'll see some of you later.
Thanks, Josh. And next we have, I believe, Morris Johnson.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks again for coming to this session. So I am Morris Johnson. I'm a research fire ecologist at the PNW Research Station in Seattle, Washington. So I've been in Seattle for over 20 years now. But I'll always begin my talks on, yes, I've been in Seattle for a while, but I began my Forest Service career actually on Forest Service and National Forest Service systems. So I started my Forest Service career in the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest on the Prospect Ranger District before transitioning over to the PNW Research Station. So I have worked on the district for a couple of years, and so over the years I have developed my research program around topics that I know is going to benefit who I consider the folks who actually do the job of managing the national forest. And so my topic is really the post-fire management, the fuel succession. And so after the 2020 wildfires, I put in this proposal to look at salvage logging effects on stand structure, woody field loadings, and seedling regeneration. And I'm sure everyone who's on this call, they probably know and understand the controversy surrounding, the post-fire management, or i.e. salvage logging. And so right here to the right, I have this slide that I always introduce. Basically, there's different perspectives on what should happen. Either you're on the west side or the dry side of the dry forest. Different perspectives on what should happen after large scale disturbances, right? In particular, large wildfires that create these large patches of dead trees. And so the different perspectives are really two perspectives, right? So there's those who are for active management, or those who are against active management. And so I always use this example. Here's this is not the west side example, but I will get to the west side example later. But this is from the August complex in California. And so what we show here is, here's the data that we collected. And basically, if you are against, salvage logging, you're basically for passive management. And we project the data out, 50 years, and we can see that over time that you're gonna have an increase in woody field loadings. And then all of those other lines basically represent, some sort of, active management. And so my project here on the west side is really looking at, the difference between what would happen in terms of if you don't do anything after these large stand replacing fires, or what happens if you do active management. And so this is a national project. It's not just on the west side. I have projects on the Mendocino National Forest, Plumas National Forest, Trinity, Sierra, Colville National Forest, Colville Tribe Lands, Boise National Forest, El Dorado National Forest. But in 2020, it was have a unique opportunity to work with the managers on the Umpqua National Forest, on the Archer Creek Fire, and then two districts on the BLM land, the Roseburg District in Northwest Oregon, and then Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest on the Chico Bar. And so the idea for all of these, this project is like the whole idea is the co-production. So I work with the managers on the IDT team. So here's an example of the IDT team on the Mendocino National Forest. And so as we go through the NEPA process, the idea is to add a monitoring objective or learning objective to the purpose and need. And so if you would search a lot of these post-fire management NEPA documents, you will see that this research that component is in the purpose and need. And so if you come to my session later today, I will go into more depth on how my co-production is helping managers manage post-fire fuel succession. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Morris. So now what we're gonna do, just as a reminder, is we're gonna have 2 back-to-back breakout sessions. Each one will be 15 minutes. So Pete is setting up the breakout rooms right now. And so in a second, you should see an option to choose breakout rooms. And these are how they're assigned. Breakout room 1 is Matt Riley's work on reevaluating historical fire regimes. Breakout room 2 is with Josh Halofsky, looking at short-term post-fire dynamics. And then the third breakout room, number 3, will be with Morris discussing post-fire salvage logging. So you'll choose one now, it'll be 15 minutes. You'll come back to the group and then you'll immediately have an opportunity to choose a second breakout room to go to. So